Okay, platypuses, today in English you're going to continue learning all about Samuel Pepys. Last week in your computing lesson you researched facts all about him and it was lovely to see your work. Today the learning question is, what do I know about Samuel Pepys? And the success criteria is to know who Samuel Pepys was and to answer reading comprehension questions about his life. Now I'm going to read through these slides and this is where you're going to get the answer to your reading comprehension questions. I am going to read through it first and then I'd like you to read through it yourself. You can get help from the grown-ups at home, okay? And then you can answer the questions which I've uploaded for you, okay? So, who was Samuel Pepys? Samuel Pepys worked for the British government and Navy and lived during the 17th century. He is most famous for writing a diary between 1659 and 1669. Today we use his diary as a historical record of the events of the past. So we know that's how we found out lots of information about the Great Fire of London. So, the life of Samuel Pepys. Samuel Pepys was born in London on 23rd of February 1633. His father was a tailor and his mother was a butcher's daughter. He went to St Paul's Cathedral in London and later went to Cambridge University. After university, he began working for the government and the Navy. His cousin, the Earl of Sandwich, helped him to get a good job. Samuel Pepys married a young French girl named Elizabeth in 1655. Samuel Pepys enjoyed music and played several instruments during his life. He also liked going to the theatre, wearing fine clothes and a wig. Many rich men did this. Okay, so the diary. Samuel Pepys began writing his diary on the 1st of January 1660. He wrote of everyday things that happened in his life, but also about important events in Britain's history. Pepys wrote with quills and ink. There were no ballpoint pens in those days, so he actually wrote didn't use pens like we did. He had a pen called a quill, which was made out of a feather. He wrote using a secret code, a shortened version of words. He did this because he didn't want people he knew, including his wife, Elizabeth, to read his diary. Okay, so the Great Plague. Pepys lived through the Great Plague that spread through London in 1665 and wrote about it in his diary. If a person was suffering with the plague, also known as the Black Death, they would have some of these symptoms: a fever, a ring of roses, which is a circle of spots, sneezing. The plague would usually lead to death. People didn't know very much about how the plague spread, and some thought it was carried by stray cats and dogs. As a result, many animals were killed. Some thought it was in the air, so they held bunches of posies to their noses to smell instead of the air. Fleas on black rats are what actually caused the disease to spread. Okay, so it was caused by the rats. Ring of Roses is a famous nursery rhyme about people suffering from the Great Plague. You probably know that nursery rhyme. Let's go on to the next one, the Great Fire. Pepys also wrote about the Great Fire of London a year later in 1666. On the 2nd of September 1666, a fire broke out at Thomas Farriner's bakery on Pudding Lane. In those days, houses in London were made out of wood and were built very close together. It was easy for the fire to spread. The fire burned for 4 days and more than 13,000 houses were destroyed. Most of the people in the city were able to escape the fire, but sadly at least 6 people lost their lives. Now, you might already know that information, but you might need this information on here to answer some of the questions today. Let's go on to the next one. So, the Great Fire. Pepys recorded the way people escaped the fire. He watched them escape in boats on the River Thames because the fire could not spread along the water. When he felt he was in danger, he buried a Parmesan cheese from Italy because it was expensive. In those days, firefighters were not as well equipped as they are today. There were no fire engines. Instead, they used horse-drawn carts and leather buckets. They had no gas masks or protective clothing, so they were in danger of catching fire if they entered a burning building. It's a very dangerous time. Right, let's go on to the next one. Okay, so that was the end of the reading to help you answer the questions. And just before I finish, we're going to do this true or false game to see how well you understood it. So, read the following sentences and decide whether they are true or false. So I'm going to read them out. You're going to say true or false, okay? The information you might already know, and I will have read about it. So, Samuel Pepys wore a wig. True or false? Okay, what do you think? It is true. Okay, we know that he wore a wig, and that was what a lot of rich men did during that time. His wife was Spanish. Is it true or false? Okay, so that is false because actually his wife was French. Okay, the next one. He was good friends with King Charles I. Now, do you know about King Charles I? Okay, this one I think is a bit of a trick question. Is it true or false? It is false because actually it was King Charles II who he was friends with, not the first. Okay, his cousin helped him to get a good job. Is that true or false? We've read that information. It is true. He did help him to get a good job. And the last question, the Great Fire of London broke out in a butcher's shop. Okay, is that true? A butcher's shop is where they sell meat. Is that true? I know you're all saying that it is false. We know that it was a baker's shop. Okay, so your job now is to use this information to answer the questions that I've uploaded for you. Remember to go back and find the information in what I've read. Okay, and if you're not sure of any of the words, ask a grown-up at home. Okay, remember to write your answers very clearly.